So, here's the deal. So I'll get it done as soon as possible. I did assign a reading after the DBQ 639 to 682. I'm going to give you one more day. So it's due on Saturday. I'll be here at 6 a.m. I'll be boiling up a big pot of scones for all of you. Those are the best scones. Boiling cauldron. If I'm not here, I'm just getting supplies. Wait for me. Just wait for me. I'll be here. Wait outside Partridge Knoll. It's due on Monday. You got paper, you have your outline. You can have it. All right. Now, remember, and you remember 4 paragraphs. All right. Oh, and I got your good. Thank you for getting that done. Next, I do have to give you a little homework over Christmas break, but it's a Festivus miracle. Huh? What about John C. Brown? He's not really good. All right, you got it. All right, so I will have to give you some homework, but you're going to have a choice of 2 things. I'm thinking about 2 different things. I want to hear a little bit of feedback. So think about this and let me know tomorrow, and I'll decide one of the 2. So you got to do a little bit of reconstruction on your own. The textbook is very good on reconstruction, and so one choice would be I like my little diagram, my little boxes, and do notes on reconstruction out of the textbook, and I do a quiz when you get back, a big quiz, and or PBS did a fantastic documentary called, wait for it, Reconstruction. I know, that blow you away, and I could post that, and I have a worksheet that goes along with that, and you could watch it. It's really good. But then again, I know there's time issues on that, but both of them take time. I really like the video, but also we can do notes. So think about one of the 2. I would post it. It's a great documentary. It's about 6 years old, and they kind of went all out on this one. This was good. So think about which one you want to do. But we got to do one of the 2. When I mean we, I actually mean you. I don't want to do it with that. I already know. Or do you want to just come back and I just give you a test over? Oh, let's do that. Oh, okay. So I'll think about doing extra credit next week, and today, if everything goes right, I'll get to another person we'll do it, and I'll tell you other people at the end of the month. Sound good? And one more thing. I might be getting a phone call because I have my phone on, it's in my pocket, so I might all of a sudden have to run out and take a phone call. And so if I do, I'm just letting you know. And then the same old thing open to you. If it's an emergency, you have to do it on the phone, let me know so you get out of that. So let's go ahead and finish up where we're at. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So go and start and please write down. There's probably not. But there could be major work slowdowns. We're already in the middle of one. Part of the reason it's taking me so long to do is they requested we don't have only work. And normally I would take stuff home to the grade. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it right now. Huh? Yeah, paper in your outline and that one. All right. Let's go ahead then and get started. And I need a desk. All right. So, did we get to what were the 2 ironclads? scoot over just a little bit. Monitor and after this battle, what happened to every single fleet? I didn't see that.
They're off.
The victory was a wooden ship. I know.
The rug did it.
It's still there. It's still part of the Royal Navy. Yeah. All right. So after this battle of the Merrimack and Monitor, what happened to every fleet in the world? Obsolete. And what became more important than tactics and generals?
Weapons.
Technology and industry, which it's still the way it is today. It's weapons, and also who can build the most, who has the greatest technology. You be the bravest person in the world, but if you have a flintlock musket and your opponent has a machine gun, things are going to be a little tough for you. And that's actually a precursor to what's going to happen during the Second Opium War. And so we had the Peninsular Campaign. Who was the commander of the Union forces who was energetic and aggressive and believed he should attack immediately? That's me lying. McClellan. McClellan believed what about the Confederates?
So many.
Who are the private detectives? Pinkertons. And this is the Peninsular Campaign, and I told you about Yorktown and all the faking and everything. Did we get to where he got funded to the gates of Richmond?
That's the intrepid.
Actually, it took a month and a half. He was just about ready to attack the Confederates at Yorktown, and they pulled back. Like literally the night of, they did the light campfires and then moved back. They could think they're still there. The Union forces attacked an empty lot. And so instead of aggressively pushing to the open area, McClellan wasted a month and a half. But it still almost worked. By the end of May, Johnston and the Confederates were pushed back to the gates of Richmond. McClellan had been reinforced to 100,000 men, and he didn't have enough men to totally surround Richmond. But this could be it. If he could win a big victory, the war could end right there. You can imagine going into May then, as slow as this was and as angry as Lincoln was, people are euphoric in the North. And I haven't got to it, but there's also a couple of huge victories here in the West too. That it just seemed like the war is about over. Johnston, with his back to the wall, counterattacked at the Battle of Fair Oaks and/or Seven Pines on May 31st, 1862. And this was a confusing battle. No one had ever fought with armies this big. The Confederates had close to 60,000 men. The Union forces almost 100, even though only about 80,000 men actually fought in this battle. And at some places, they were firing 10 paces away to each other's faces. It was a bloody battle. And got to have a balloon. A lot of battles with balloons, even though the balloon wasn't actually there. They couldn't get it up. It had a hole in it. At the end of the day, it was a bloody draw. But let me give you an idea how bloody this was. Now, once again, I'm just going to tell you the casualties. I said it in the Bull Run. You don't need to know this, except for a couple times. But I just want to give you an idea how bloody. One battle, killed, wounded, and missing. This was a day. 11,000 casualties in a day. And that's over 1,000 killed. And so another bloody battle. One of those casualties was the Confederate commander, Joseph E. Johnston. He took a musket ball called a mini ball after the French inventor, right here, lodged in his head, right there. Didn't kill him. It was low enough that it didn't get into his gut, and that would infect, and there was nothing they could do then. The bullet would be there for the rest of his life. He lived for another 27 years. And using the terminology of the day, for the rest of his life, it would leak. Blood and pus, yeah. But he survived, and we're not done with Johnston. But now Davis needs new command. And against the advice of virtually everybody, he picked Robert E. Lee. People thought Lee was too old. In fact, when he took command, his men called him Old Granny Lee to mock him, and it's also very misogynistic. But Lee also had him dig trenches, and they were mad. That's slave work. These were Southerners. But Lee would turn out to be one of the most audacious and aggressive generals in American history. And one thing about being audacious, it is so shocking that sometimes it could be, it could just totally just devastate the enemy, terrify them in a kind of mass. People think that's intelligence sometimes. And he called his army now the Army of Northern Virginia. And Lee would be the commander of this for the end of the war. Lee is such a well-known figure that people think he commanded the Confederate armies. No, just the Army of Northern Virginia. And I love these pictures of the Army of Northern Virginia because it showed how they were equipped. Almost none of the men had uniforms. They had whatever clothing they had, like the American Revolution. And you can really see it here, can't you? Just, I like the flannel shirt, whatever hat they had. A lot of times they would take the nut of the butternut tree, and if you smash it, a little oil will come out that could be a brown dye. And so they would be kind of dyed brown. They put on whatever clothing they had. So sometimes you hear the Confederates called butternuts. And brown's actually not bad camouflage. And you see a couple uniforms mixed in. I love him in a suit. Their officer, just whatever they had. They didn't have knapsacks. They put their gear in a blanket, wrapped it around their shoulders. They didn't have that. And so really poorly equipped, but determined fighters. And Lee shocked everybody. A month after he took command, at the end of June, less than a month, he ordered a massive counterattack. Now he'd been reinforced by Stonewall Jackson and others, and they attacked the Union right here. And it began a series of battles called the 7 Days. And the amazing thing was, the Union forces there stopped the Confederate attack and beat them back. And it looked like a big victory for the Union. But remember, this is McClellan. And McClellan got this attack, and he immediately believed that this is just going to be the series of massive hammer-like attacks against them. And he's outnumbered. And he's got to save the army. So after a victory, what did McClellan do? He pulled his men back. Pulled back. The Confederates attacked again, were beaten off again, but he pulled back. 7 days these fights would go. And all but one of them would be Union victories. And McClellan kept pulling back. In fact, the last battle at Malvern Hill, Confederates did just a wave charge, bayonet charge uphill against cannon with canister. Remember I told you about canister that held about 250 musket balls? Confederate soldiers were mowed down in heaps, and McClellan retreated again to the sea, or the river. In fact, he hid on board a ship called the Galena, and this is going to be mocked about this. He claimed he was getting ready for the possible retreat. The Confederates in these battles, casualties, lost nearly 21,000 men. That was a third of Lee's forces. The Union forces lost 16,000. You don't need to know these numbers. I'm just trying to give you an idea how bloody these 7 days were. But McClellan had more men, but he still retreated. In fact, he retreated to this place on the James River called Harrison's Landing, dug camps, and it was surrounded by hills, so he's bottled up. Lincoln couldn't believe it. I mean, imagine it went from euphoria to absolute crushing defeat, it seemed like. 7 days was not a Union victory tactically on the battlefield, but long-term, called strategic, a massive Confederate victory. It turned the entire course of history. The 7 days would be huge. So, McClellan is there. He won't move. Reinforcements are coming, and Lincoln finally decides, I can't send this man any more reinforcements because they're going into a well and not being used. In fact, he would quip to a friend, I wonder if I should ask McClellan if I can borrow his army for a while. Lincoln even went down there that July and begged McClellan to move. Imagine the president, who was commander-in-chief, begging him. And McClellan proceeded to inform Lincoln that he knew nothing about the military and perhaps we need a dictator. He was really scared that McClellan would take his great army and make himself dictator. So you know what Lincoln did? He just created a new army and ordered McClellan to give up part of his army to his new army around Washington called the Army of Virginia, and gave it to a general by the name of Pope. General Pope won a victory. He took an island that the Confederates had fortified called Island Number 10. Good name, huh? Because it's the 10th island south of the Ohio River. They have clever names on the Mississippi. But he took this on the Mississippi. It wasn't like this glorious victory, but it was a victory. And Pope had a reputation of being a blowhard. He announced he was going to hang all the rebels when he gets to Richmond. And Lee, who despised Pope from the old army, realized Pope's not going to do anything. Pope will move slow, and McClellan, with the army he had left, would do nothing. And so we're coming up to the second Bull Run and/or Manassas, fought on the very same battlefield. If you go to Bull Run, where the first battle was fought, it's on these rolling kind of farmland. Now it's part of the national park. You really know what's going on. This battle is a really confusing battle, and it's all forested over. So if you get a chance and you want to go, I recommend it. I'm not saying that, but you have no idea what's going on because you're just in the middle of trees. The trees weren't there in 1862 because they cut them all down for firewood. But now they're there. And so this really confusing battle, here's McClellan bottled up here. Lee just left him. He still had like 50,000 men here. And Lee took his he'd been reinforced, but still only had about 50,000 men, and totally outmaneuvered Pope, who was moving this way, swept around him and got behind him at the second Bull Run battlefield. When Pope retreated, his army was routed. He got caught in a vice and didn't realize he was trapped. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. I don't understand. Well, here's the West Point Atlas map that show you exactly what happened. You got it now? Are we cool? Yeah. I have no idea what's going on. West Point has really good maps if you know what happened in the battle. If you don't know, it's just stuff. Well, it was a really confusing fight. Pope was outmaneuvered and humiliated, and his army was defeated and again had to retreat. It wasn't a rout, but had to retreat back to Washington, D.C. And generals who were with McClellan then were sent to Pope were furious. They were mad at McClellan for retreating, and they begged him to keep going, and then mad at Pope for blundering into a trap. The most famous was arguably could have been, the best general in the United States Army, Phil Kearny. Brilliant, hard fighter, lost an arm when he volunteered for a while in the French Foreign Legion in Algeria. He begged McClellan to attack. And as they're retreating after the second Bull Run, he was riding, and that's a picture of it. He rode south towards Bull Run to find the Confederate line because he wanted Pope to counterattack. And when he found the Confederate line, he rode back that evening of the 30th. He and a couple members of his staff. It's pitch black by then, gloomy forest, and there's a few Union pickets out there, scouts. And they see shadowy riders ride at him. And what did they do? They opened fire. That's a picture. He's trying to ride away. He was hit in the back by his own men. That's one of the great what ifs, and this is what we call foreshadowing. So, what's Lee going to do? Lee is now down to about 40,000 men. Oh, I didn't tell you how bloody Bull Run was. The second Bull Run, 2 days. Just to give you an idea, once again, another 25,500. 16,000 of them were Union casualties. I'm just trying to give you an idea how just horrible this was. Well, Lee is sitting there on the battlefield, Northern Virginia. There's hardly a blade of grass because all these armies, their horses have eaten everything. He's out of supplies. Half his men don't have shoes. He knows he's way outnumbered. What does he do? He invades the north. Oh, that's Phil Kearny's statue. Lee invades the north. He decides to cross the Potomac, and he's hoping if he can, this goes against the Southern strategy of holding out. But he's thinking, if he can win a big victory in the north, Britain might enter the war. Remember the Battle of Saratoga, which got the United States, or we got the French to help the United States in the Revolutionary War. That's what he's hoping. And so, if he can get into Pennsylvania, win a big victory, but also this, there's midterm elections in the United States, and they're going to carry on while there's a civil war. If the Republicans do badly in this, maybe they'll get out of the fight and let the Confederacy survive. And so this is a risk. This is from Harper's Magazine. They had sketch artists, and so they sketched them fording the Potomac west of Washington, D.C. He attacked Harper's Ferry, that same Harper's Ferry that John Brown went, and moved north. While this is going on, Lincoln is sitting in the White House, absolutely crushed. It looked so good in the spring, and now it looks like disaster. Well, in 1862, the fight was for Union. But he realized Union was not enough. Nobody knew was volunteering. He needed to find a cause that would get people to join the United States Army and win. That means widen the war. And what was his one weapon he had? Free the slaves, AKA emancipation. He's going to roll the die and try to free the slaves. Now, because the southern states were in rebellion, he had the power to put down the rebellion. He had this power in those areas. By the way, this is him playing his trump card, slavery, against Jeff Davis, and this is a horrible caricature of a slave. So it was intensely racist. And here's the problem. He just lost 2 big defeats, 7 days. Second Bull Run was even more humiliating, and that was all him with the Army of Virginia. There were a couple of setbacks in the West too, and so he couldn't do it after defeats because that would make him look desperate. He needs a victory. He needs a victory. But yes, a victory here, but it also shows one thing that both Lee and Lincoln, by pursuing this, are showing. It's not going to be won on the battlefield with a victory. Wars are political. He's got to get a reason for people to vote Republicans in the midterm so they finish the fight. Wars are not won on the battlefield if the political will is not there to win it. So, Hope was a disaster. They sent him to Minnesota. Fight the Yankton with Sioux who were trying to defend their land. So who's he going to put in command of the Union Army? Here you have Lee trying to win that one big victory and get Britain in the war, turn the course of the war. Lincoln needs a victory for emancipation. Who does he put in the command to what's going to be the most crucial day in American history? No? Good guess. He was there. Anyone know? Who did he put in command?
Ulysses S. Grant.
Grant? You've heard of him? McClellan! He had nobody else. He put McClellan. By the way, the men were overjoyed. So McClellan took command. Now the men, the rest of his command, Pope's command, other reinforcements, they're sending men as quickly as possible from training. He has 100,000 men, even though a lot of them weren't very well trained. Lee is crossing the Potomac and moving into Pennsylvania. And we're coming up to the bloodiest day in American history, the Battle of Antietam. September 17, 1862. In the Confederacy, you might see it called the Battle of Sharpsburg, and it's Antietam Creek. But now, I mean, pretty much Antietam, it's Antietam. And here's the West Point map. All right, let me explain this. Here's the Potomac. Here's Washington, D.C. Lee crossed here, but divided his forces up. He sent 10,000 to take Harper's Ferry and divided up to try to basically scoop up as much food, supplies as he could. And he would try to unify in Pennsylvania and win that fight. Well, McClellan began moving right behind him. And this is McClellan, so moving very slow. In fact, they are using the same campsites and camp circles Union forces are that Confederates used 2 days earlier. Here is a great picture of Hagerstown, Maryland, of Confederates in 1862 on the left. A photographer got his camera on the roof of a store and took a picture of the Confederates marching through. These kind of candid shots just didn't happen. So you see the Confederates marching through. You see their uniforms, the gear and their blankets wrapped around their shoulders. That's a really cool picture, just because it's so rare. Here are Union forces at a campfire. This is 1862. And 2 days after the Confederates went through Hagerstown, near that town, Union forces, about 7 men, were using an exact campsite. The fire ring was still there. From 2 days earlier, Confederates were there. They just used the same one. And they're cooking their delicious meal of salt pork and hardtack. Hardtack are double-baked crackers that don't rot, but they're literally hard as a rock. You'd have to break them up and kind of either gnaw on them or dip them in water or coffee. And salt pork is the saltiest thing ever made. The men described it as, what's the saltiest thing you've ever eaten? Now that's salt. That's salt pork. But they're cooking their meal, and a soldier finds, a sergeant, looks down and finds something that was really valuable in the North because they couldn't get these things. 3 cigars. They're all smokers back then. And he's overjoyed. Cigars, they haven't said cigars forever. And they'll wrap a little piece of paper, and fortunately didn't throw the paper in the fire, because when they opened it up and read it, it was Lee's orders to his units, how he divided them up. And McClellan got this. He could attack Lee's forces divided and destroy them in kind. I mean, this is a golden opportunity. A staff officer on Lee's command wrote up the orders and then saved them, thinking he wanted a souvenir of the great victory, and wrapped him around cigars, thinking he would never lose these cigars. And so they got the plans to McClellan. Now, what did McClellan do when he saw the plans? You would think this. One of the few times he thought, God, and if I move fast, he's got to cross a mountain. If I move fast, I can win the war. But this is McClellan, so of course he didn't move fast. He slowly advanced, and right here is a long mountain between where most of Lee's forces are, and he's advancing this way, and McClellan. It's called South Mountain, and McClellan hesitated at South Mountain. He didn't push his men over, and a few hundred cavalrymen held him from this pass. That's supposed to be a painting of it, even though it's really heavily forested. I nearly died on South Mountain, and it was foggier than heck, and I was driving there and I couldn't see, and I pulled over. It's literally soup. I couldn't see the front of my car, and I pulled over, and I was way up. There was bank shoulder. I was way over there. Opened my door, and just took a step out. And fortunately, I didn't walk all the way around my car. A semi truck came barreling by, and I could feel it go by here. Needless to say, that'll get your heart pumping. That truck was going. He was probably going 60, and he was drifting off to the right because he couldn't see. So you know what I did? I just got in my car, shut my eyes, and drove faster. That's what you do in pea soup. Don't do that. Yeah, that was nearly the end of me, and you don't have to worry about your Christmas assignment. Yeah. So moving on. South Mountain. Somebody else would give it to you what it meant. And so Lee was able to get his forces together, and now he only has about 30,000 men. There's still 10,000 at Harper's Ferry, and they're marching the whole day of the battle. Lee strung his 30,000 men here. By the morning of the battle, McClellan had almost 80,000 men, but he thought he was outnumbered. McClellan came up with a really good plan, and the battle is going to have 3 parts. Here, attack here, right at sunup. Lee will have to shift his forces to stop the attack, and then attack here. Lee will have to shift his forces here, and then attack here. That's going to be weakened. It's a really good plan if it's coordinated. But McClellan gave the orders that night, and then sat on the hill at Pry House and didn't move. He kept 30,000 men in reserve and never committed them to the fight. So the morning began, and they had to march through Miller's cornfield right here. Now think about September. How tall is corn? Have you been in corn? It's this tall. And so they march through this huge cornfield. If you go there today, it's all done by the National Park Service, and they grow corn and pick it. If you go in fall, you can go through the corn. And so they kind of advance through this. This is from a film called Antietam Visit, showing reenactors going through the corn. And as they march through it near Stonewall Jackson's brigade right here, Jackson's brigade opened fire at about 100 yards with shell and canister and cut them down, not only the men, but the corn in rows. And just stacks of men and corn piled up. But General Joe Hooker, the commander here, sent more men in, and they began to push the Confederates back. Lee was forced to shift forces and back and forth across the cornfield. A Union general by the name of Mansfield was supposed to reinforce, and that could have turned the tide right there. But Mansfield was in his 60s, and he wanted to prove he was still young and fit to fight. He had never been in combat before. So he rode horseback in the very front. In fact, he was about 50 yards in front of his men, screaming and yelling for them to follow. And what happened? He was shot and his unit got lost. He wasn't the only one to get lost. They didn't attack. Another corps got lost right here. They could hear gunfire. They marched around in a circle for an hour and a half and couldn't find anything. And so, when this battle finally calmed down, there were no more Union forces to attack, and thousands would be wounded or killed. The second attack that was supposed to come here were lost. And so the Confederates got a break. Matthew Brady ran a photography studio in Philadelphia, and he heard a big battle was coming and sent his photographers to Maryland to try to get pictures of this. And his photographers arrived just after the battle, the 18th. And they took pictures that had never been taken before. Unless you were at a battlefield, you did not see scenes like this before. He took pictures. These are Union soldiers bloating. It was a hot fall day. And there they are along the fence. That's right past here is the cornfield. So today you can go right along that very spot. They've reconstructed that fence. It's all there in the battlefield. And this caused a sensation. The horrors of war. That is where they died, right where they lied. They were moved. In front of Dunkard Church, a church of pacifists. Ironically, some of the hardest fighting of the war would take place. These are Confederate soldiers bloating in the sun. No one had ever seen anything like this. And this caused a massive sensation. And Matthew Brady is probably going to be one of the most famous owners of a photography studio in history. People will claim as a photographer. No, he just contracted with photographers. And he would do an exhibition of their work in Philadelphia, and it caused a sensation. And thousands came to see it. And after this, every photography studio would follow the wars around, the battle around. And so, for example, Gettysburg, just swarms of photographers, and they would be grabbing dead men and moving them to give them more dramatic poses and then take pictures. It just got absolutely disgusting as everyone tried to make money off of this. But these first pictures, never seen the horrors of war like this. Well, that second attack was an hour and a half late, and there was only about 1,000 Confederates along this little line here of a sunken road by erosion. And that road made a perfect trench line, where the Union forces had to attack, and the Confederates were behind in the sunken road and the fence behind it. And soon this sunken road would be called Bloody Lane. And Union forces attacked downhill through the corn towards this line, and attack after attack were beaten back by Confederates. Casualties were appalling. I'll show you a picture of the corn. Remember, this is 9-foot tall corn stalks. I'll show you a picture in just a second. But if you go there today, here are a couple paintings of the action. West Point put up this observation tower in the 1880s. Every cadet who goes to West Point, the military academy, has to do a class on the Civil War, and they all go to Antietam. And so it's built for the cadets to learn about this. I know the fighting is now not the way they fight today necessarily. They still all go. It's a very important part of West Point. So here's in the tower looking down at the sunken road. And when I was there, the second time I was there, the temperature was over 100 degrees. And it was December. No, it was July. The humidity was 103%. If it gets beyond the saturation point. Has anyone ever been in humidity like that? We live in Helena. We don't know what humidity is. It's one of those where it feels like you just got out of the shower all the time. Just wet. It's so hot. But I was doing it. I was there. So you park over here, and I walked over here. The Battlefield's huge. You have to drive. I was doing a driving tour. And I walked down in here, and it's just steaming hot. I walked, there's steps right there. You can't see them in that picture, but I walked down the steps and went in there. And I was going to take a picture, after looking back at it. And I was swarmed by gnats once I walked in. And I don't mean a few gnats. I mean, it seemed like a million gnats. I looked down and my arm was black with gnats. I was wearing a t-shirt. I'm like this, and I must have been just looking like I was a lunatic. And I jumped out. I went up the steps, went up 2 steps. It was about 6. Once I got to the second steps, no gnats. My God, it was so weird. And so I did the walk down and put my arm down, covered with gnats, pulled it back. And I walked back, and there's a tour bus getting on. These hot people, they're boiling, got out. And I said, don't go in there. There's gnats. And they looked at me, gnats. And so they all walk in. There's about 20 of them all going like this and swapping. So beware of gnats. I mean, I was breathing them in. They got in my ears. I don't know if you guys could have taken them. I'm from an older, tougher generation, but no, it was actually kind of scary. So finally, a concerted rush by a brigade made up of Irish immigrants, the Irish Brigade, organized by a hero of Irish independence, Young Ireland it was called. His name is Thomas Francis Marr. This is a flag I bought in Antietam of one of the regiments of the Irish Brigade. The 69th Regiment, Irish Brigade. So they're all living in New York. And Marr was a hero of the attempt in 1848 for Ireland to break away from Britain. They tried to revolt, a year of revolutions. He would be captured, but not before he invented the Irish flag. Copying the French flag, and it's orange, white, and green. The Irish flag by Thomas Francis Marr. And Marr would be condemned to die for his effort to overthrow the British. His sentence was commuted, but he was sent to Tasmania, which was an island south of Australia, for prison. So he was sent there to die in Tasmania. But he escaped. He swam out to a boat that was waiting for him over 200 yards in the ocean, and then sailed to San Francisco, then made his way to New York City. And he would become very prominent in the Irish immigrant community, and this hero, and was always going to go back to Ireland. And he convinced thousands of Irish to join the fight against the Confederacy that will help Ireland fight against their oppressors, they were told. And even though he was a Democrat, he would be very valued by the Republican presidency. So that's Thomas Francis Marr. That's the monument there. They broke through and finally pushed the Confederates back. The problem was McClellan didn't send any reinforcements. And so they broke through but couldn't hold and were pushed back. Another golden opportunity. I should add, Marr was crushed by what happened here. Over 500 men of his 1,000-man brigade were killed or wounded. Men he promised this would help Ireland, and they would die. And it would be even worse at a place called Fredericksburg. Marr would never recover and couldn't fight anymore, but Lincoln knew he was valuable. So Lincoln, the end of the next year, sent Marr west to become the lieutenant governor of this new territory. You might have heard of it. It's called Montana. And when Marr got there, the governor, who was appointed by the president, said, well, good luck, I resign. Because there were a bunch of cutthroat thugs, criminals, called vigilantes. There were a bunch of Confederates who were attacking the government there. Yeah, the vigilantes were Confederate sympathizers and just hooligans. So Marr was left there. And Marr is going to be murdered by these cutthroat Confederate vigilantes. who were just a bunch of traitors. But later on, there's Mar's statue. Here's the unveiling of the statue of Mar. You might have seen it. Did you know Montana has a capital and it's in Helena? And that's the statue, Thomas Francis Mar. And isn't it amazing that here we have in the Capitol High, Helena School District, you do a parade honoring those Confederate traitors. Isn't that kind of fascinating? At least we don't have our nickname after them. Whose nickname? Yeah. So the statue is kind of awesome. He was murdered by vigilantes who were Confederates. So back to the battle. That's Bloody Lane after the fight. And look at all the dead just piled up in there. They just mounds of dead. But here's the amazing thing. Look at the corn. Just cut down by all the firemen. Well, the last attack is going to be right here. The last attack. There's a bridge here. And a Union commander with 15,000 men, Ambrose Burnside, had to cross the creek, and there was virtually nothing here. Just a couple hundred Confederates from Georgia. And if he would push across quickly, he could get the Confederate rear and win the war. McClellan's plan worked. But McClellan is back here not paying attention, and Burnside keeps trying to cross this narrow bridge. When just a few hundred yards, or 100 yards up the river, his men could have crossed and not got their hips wet and a ford. And so for 3 hours, he kept pushing men across this 8-foot wide bridge. Now the bridge has his name, Burnside's Bridge. And that was the third part. We had the cornfield, Bloody Lane, and Burnside's Bridge. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking, but I want to see more of Burnside's Bridge. You can. Guess who fought Burnside's Bridge? You see it? Look up there. It's the same, right? You be impressed? You be impressed. Now, here's the bridge, right? Now watch this. I got little army guys. Here's a Confederate soldier. Here's Union. We can play for the rest of the year. Who's excited? Yeah. Who would have really liked to have this if, let's say, they were 8 years old? I gotta say, I would have loved it. Who would like it right now? Actually, this is really cheap. Lots of good stuff. But I'm kind of an amateur engineer. Okay, so we'll come back and play with them more. Finally, a concerted rush got across the bridge, and it looked like they got in the rear. A concerted rush. They got into the rear and maybe could break through. In fact, they're driving in. My great-great-great-grandfather was part of Burnside's corps. He was in Sturgis's brigade. Partridge, Mark Partridge from Ohio, and there were a bunch of Partridges who fought here. He fought all the way to the end of the war. And the monument for his regiment is right about here. And they got across, and it looked like, but they're exhausted. And as they moved, those Confederates who had been marching for almost 24 straight hours from Yorktown, from Harper's Ferry, arrived just at that moment. And they attacked the exhausted Union forces and stopped them. If they would have pushed aggressively, or McClellan would have sent in his reserves, they could have won the war right there. Antietam is one of those just amazing battles. There were so many lost opportunities from South Mountain, aggressive attacks, could have changed everything. And if you're going to go to a Civil War battlefield, this is the best to go to. You see what's going on. It's not like Gettysburg was just mobbed with tourists. It's the best. It's really an amazing place to go. At the end of the day, the men could not believe what just happened. There were just piles of dead and dying men like cordwood between the two lines. Lee, in not one day of fighting, Lee had nearly 14,000 casualties. The Union forces had nearly 13,000. In one day, about 8.5 hours of fighting, over 3,000 men died. This is still, to this day, the bloodiest day in American history, the Battle of Antietam. But remember, who needed a victory? Lee's army was nearly gone. The next day, they both just stared at each other's two armies in disbelief of what just happened. McClellan should have attacked, but he was just overwhelmed by the bloodshed. I understand completely, but he still should have done it. End the war. Lee was able to escape. At the end of the day, McClellan held the battlefield, and that allowed Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. It would free slaves in areas held by the rebellion, but it would not take effect until January 1st, 1863. So it gave the Confederates 3 more months. Here's Lincoln with all the great documents in history writing it. Now, here's the Confederate version of this. As you can imagine what the Confederates heard. Oh, emancipation. It freed slaves in areas controlled by the rebellion. They're thinking slave rebellion. I love this one with Lee or Lincoln. And who's holding his inkwell? The devil. And that's John Brown looking over at him. But what this did is, who was freed by this? So slaves in areas controlled by the rebellion, meaning who was freed? You think the Confederacy is going to free their slaves now? It freed nobody, unless what happens? Unless the Union wins. The Union has got to win. But once they made it this, it ended slavery. And Britain, there's no way Britain went into the war now. Absolutely no way. And it allowed for the recruitment of black soldiers. Now, Tanner, do you have this down? I'll wait for it. I got time. It allowed for the recruitment of black soldiers. 1 out of 10 U.S. soldiers by the end of the war will be almost exclusively former slaves, fighting for equality, fighting for independence, and would be necessary for the end of the war. This is huge. One of the most important documents, and that's why Antietam is the most important battle of the Civil War. Not for the actual, sake of on the battlefield winning the war that way, but it changed the United States forever. Now, McClellan didn't move. Lee escaped and went into Virginia. McClellan stayed there. And finally, Lincoln did it. He fired him and replaced him with Ambrose Burnside. Now, Ambrose Burnside would not only, because even though Burnside's bridge was kind of a disaster, Burnside, he won it. So Lincoln was desperate. So he ordered Burnside to take command. Now, Burnside was not only an inventor, he invented a new rifle. He was considered the most handsome general in the United States Army. And I want to be very clear about this. I'm going to show this picture, and I'm reluctant to do it. But I know. In fact, men would start copying Burnside. Wait for it, and very quickly we begin to grow their own fancy pair of Burnsides. So, who else can you dress up as? Burnside? No, wait, we're not done. 2 more people. Clara Barton. Clara Barton, who would be the most famous nurse in this war, and I have allowed Fluoride Calhoun. Fluoride, his wife. She drives the pair. You know what else I'm going to do? You know what else? Frederick Douglass. Yeah, there's a teacher who teaches in this building right now. No, he wasn't bald then. He's not bald now. He shaved his arm for in my class. The teacher teaches here right now.
Who was it?
Mr. Rain.
Oh, no way. I'm so cute.
Ask me then tomorrow.
Do you want anything attached to this or
Just give it to me and I'll give me this.
I want your outline.
My outline's at the back.
Not at the back there.
Got it. Okay, good. Yes. You did. And it's people like you.
I can't read chapter 15 if I don't have my book.
Stay calm. Stay calm.
So was today just all about Antietam?
Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay.
Antietam, Emancipation Proclamation.
All right.
You know, that's why that Antietam is so important.
Yeah.
But it's also a really good story. Antietam is kind of amazing. And I filmed it, you know. Sorry, we went right to the bell. I always go to the bell. That's what I do. I got time for you. I've graded a lot of DBQs, I just have to finish them up.